You met him. You can tell a story of your meeting him.
I met him in 1971, and we
He was
met him
5
in
years old.
1971 as well. And we lived together with Khetsun Sangpo in 1974. And he was a remarkable being, most of all because of his combination of good humor and profound wisdom. And I will let Anne take it from here.
Okay. Oh, no, I don't. Yeah. So welcome for me too, and happy Valentine's Day. This is a great moment, as Mary Scott identified it when she said, oh, Valentine's Day, hard essence. We'll talk about Khetsun Sangpo Rinpoche. Khetsun Sangpo Rinpoche was born in Tibet. He came out of Tibet in, I think, the early 60s. And so he was a fully trained Lama when he left Tibet. And by the time we met him, he had done even more retreat. He did, when he came out into exile, he spent the first year or two in retreat. And so by the time actually Harvey ran into him in Sarnath in 1971, he had just returned from 10 years in Japan. He became fluent in Japanese. He was Dzogchen Rinpoche. Dzogchen Rinpoche, very, very famous, and for many years the head of the Nyingma, the ancient school of Tibetan Buddhism. Once they came out in the West, he was the head of it. Our teacher, Khetsun Sangpo Rinpoche, was his representative in Japan. He taught at all the major universities in Japan, has a whole following to this day among Japanese. And unlike, I think, any other Tibetan I have ever met, he could enjoy eating fish because he had spent time in Japan. Tibetans don't eat fish. So he came to the United States the first time in 1974, as Harvey said. Jeffrey Hopkins, who also studied with him in India around the time we were all in India. We all met him at some contact. Jeffrey actually studied with him at that time. Harvey did too. And then he came to the University of Virginia, where Harvey was teaching Theravada Buddhism and Sanskrit, and I was plugging away graduate student. And Khetsun Sangpo came, and someone took a picture of him in their garden in Washington, D.C. when he visited there. So this was this is what he looked like then. So I'm going to show you a few slides just to get the feel of the person. As Harvey said, he was just so loving and wonderful. There was something in the gentleness of his voice. Once in a while, we would get through the crackling lines from Nepal, and he would just say, hello. And it was like, and Harvey and I would say, why aren't we there? It was just so sweet. He, different lamas have different amazing qualities, and his quality for me, and I think for many of us, is just sweetness. He was just sweet, and you could feel it. So I want to show you a few slides, and then I will read you from his book. A much later picture. Is this really the next one? Have I skipped? Yes, I've skipped a lot. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Now, how do I get it back on? Huh? Somebody want to help me with this so I get back on track?
They're trying to fix it back here.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'm going to show you some pictures. He came to University of Virginia many times, and that's where we really formed a relationship with him. As Harvey said, we lived with him for the 3 months that he was there in 1974. Harvey would teach him English. We would cook dinner, of course, and all of it was really just an excuse to hang out with him because he was so wonderful to hang out with. And he would ask us these very puzzling questions about our minds and, what were they like and where were they? And we just thought it was a riot. It was so much fun. We were totally bewildered, and he was so cute and sweet about it. And we had no idea that he was actually introducing us to a very, very central, very central line of curious engagement in Dzogchen itself. Dzogchen, the great completeness, many of you know, is the most secret, sacred, swift path of the Nyingma, the ancient Buddhist tradition, and that is our main tradition here at Dawn Mountain, largely because of Khetsun Sangpo Rinpoche and actually several of the other Dzogchen masters we met. They were all in the same lineage. So that's the heart essence I was talking about earlier. So the left thing, okay. Yes, just one time. And this was what we got. No, it's still doing it. It skipped. That is the next one. All right. So this is, of course, he's much older. And between the time that we first met him in 1970, in 71, and then myself in 1974, and the time that he died in 2009, we had many opportunities to study with him, many opportunities to be with him in Nepal, to do retreat under him there and here. And also when we were at Stanford, we invited him to California. And of course, he came to Dawn Mountain and blessed our temple in Richmond, and we have carried all those blessings here. Lama Tenzin Sambel, who many of you know, who comes once a year, is his very, very close student. So the lineage continues. We've very much connected. He had, in addition to his monastery, he has a retreat just above Bodha in Kathmandu, above the Kathmandu Valley. And we were very fortunate to be able to do retreat there. And he stayed for the first week of the retreat that Harvey and I did. And so this is a picture of him just relaxing in his retreat place. Very simple place. And he taught at the Margaret Austin Center. I'm not sure exactly what year this is. I think it was the early 2000s. You might recognize a few familiar faces. Sharon back there, and Yukari. You don't know Tuku Jigme, who has also visited Dawn Mountain. Terry with the red hair in front. Several people have passed on who are in this picture. And this is actually in front of my house. It's one of my favorite pictures of him, also in the late 2000s. Just sweet. He's just always like that. He's always like that. Teaching at Dawn Mountain, he taught some of the very sacred texts from his tradition. What's called the Yangti Nakbo, the Essential Black, which is a very rare tradition. It has links with the Heart Essence tradition, which is our core, but this is a very special and something that we got to have a lot of connection with him on, and so he's teaching. And this was, he gave initiation into a Yeshit Tsogel, a special Yeshit Tsogel practice from this Essential Black tradition at Rice, at the then, what's it called? Continuing education, what is it, something school? I forget her name. Glasgow, thank you. School of Continuing Studies. That was when Dawn Mountain itself was on Bissonnette, and second floor house in Bissonnette, and there was some kind of ruckus going on among the neighbors, and Rinpoche arrived from Nepal to begin the first night of his retreat on one Friday night. Were you there? And there was and he said, "You can't have a retreat here this weekend." I said, "What?" So I called Laura Shu, our hero, who was then working at the School of Continuing Ed, where I'd given some courses, and within 24 hours she had us a room there. So that was wonderful. This is Sangpo, his assistant, actually his brother-in-law, who still lives at the monastery, is married now, and helps Khetsun Sangpo. This was taken by Stan Merrill, whom some of you know. And it ended up being the last minute we switched it out. They had a very aged-looking, very formal-looking portrait on the front of the book. And after it, they had already designed the cover. I just said, I know I shouldn't ask this, but I have to because I'd just seen this picture, and they agreed to put it on the cover of the book. It really, again, conveys much of him. And this was when he was actually teaching the text that was in the book. Khetsun Rinpoche was a prolific writer. He was a scholar. He was a historian. He was a poet. And to our knowledge, he wrote one text on Dzogchen, on the Great Completeness, which is what is in the book. And during this week-long retreat, which was in California, Pema Öse Ling, Lama Tarchen's place in California, he spent 1 week giving oral commentary on the very profound unfolding of what is actually in his text. And Harvey and I translated for him at that time. So this really is kind of the picture of the book. I couldn't get it in the book, but that is a cardboard cutout of Dönsei Rinpoche on the throne there. There's another one of Dudjom Rinpoche on the other side, and this is around that same time at our house. I think he had just given us long transmission on the Tringzhe, actually. And this also teaching that same retreat in California, a close-up. He always just looks happy and light. He was teaching like 6 hours a day. He was, how old? Well, it was 20 years ago, and I don't know. He was in his late 70s, I think, then. He started building his last monastery when he was 74. Got pictures of him. You know, he would go every day and supervise it day in and day out. He was really very active until the very end of his life. And once we were able to take him to what we call Diamond Dawn Mountain, Kamding Sel, our little retreat place in New Mexico, and he loved it. He said, if I'd known you had this place, I wouldn't have spent 2 weeks in Canada. I would just have stayed here. And Sharon and Nam were with us, and Yukari, one of his very close Japanese students, was with us too. And another great picture. And then there was one magical day when we had Adzom Rinpoche, is our other main lineage teacher, whose work and brilliant, creative, luminous writings we hold here and practice from. He is a great figure of this tradition in Tibet. He lives in Tibet. And Rinpoche, we had a tour planned for him that summer. I don't know what summer it was, 98, 99 maybe. And then Rinpoche called, which he never ever did. He never asked for anything. He called up and he said something like, it's okay if you don't invite me this year. And we said, what? Because there had been no conversation about inviting him this year. Usually we called up and we had to beg him and beg him and beg him to come. And so here he was saying we didn't have to invite him. And so he's from central Tibet. Central Tibet is like, I don't know, London? It's like where people are light and they don't say what's on their mind. It's the people who, when you offer them food and they're starving, you know, do you want another helping? Oh, no, I couldn't. But they do. And you know that, and so you have to ask them, please, take some more, please. Whereas in eastern Tibet, which is where Adzom Rinpoche is from, that's considered totally bogus, and if somebody offers you something and you want it, you take it. So anyway, Harvey and I, having known Rinpoche all these years, said, well, I guess he wants to come. But how can we do that? We're already booked with Adzom Rinpoche, which is usually enough to send us into delirium, you know, just the work of one tour. But then we decided, okay, well, I just felt, we said, well, we're going to have to say no. And then I felt, we can't say no. He's, however old he was at that time, you know, certainly I think 80-ish at that time. And, you know, we don't know if he could. So we invited them, and Harvey toured with Khetsun Rinpoche, and I toured with Adzom Rinpoche, and without any planning at all, we just independently planned those two tours. They ended up in our house on the same night, and it was the full moon of October. It was a big, big full moon. So this is the only picture we have of the two of them together, and it's so meaningful to us because they are together for us. And also, a few days later, Adzom Rinpoche gave a talk at the then Dawn Mountain, which was still on the second floor of this little house in Bissonnette. And he said, you know, when a great master like Khetsun Sangpo invites me to teach at his monastery, I'm so honored, and I'm not going to be able to go. And because, Tibet, difficult. You can't go to, anyway. So that's how we knew that they had, they spent quite some intimate time together in our house. Rinpoche closed the door. Usually I could follow Adzim Rinpoche anywhere he went, whatever conversation he was having. I could just sit there whether I understood it or not. And I, of course, wanted to see what my two teachers were going to say to each other. And they walked into Harvey's study, and I walked in, and Adzim Rinpoche went. He closed the door. So they talked a lot. I'm sure they talked about Dzogchen. And, so our teacher wanted to invite our other teacher, and our other teacher wanted to go. So that's very sweet for us. We still are waiting for Adzim Rinpoche for the next time that he can come. A lot of our teachings, like the Poa retreat that we're about to do, the Shitro retreat that we did recently, are directly from him. He's a great revealer of texts. This was one of Rinpoche's last visits to the country, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama was in New York, so he and Tulku Jigme, audience with us. I just love this picture. I don't know where it is. He's giving an initiation. So I'm going to leave that up so you can see who's speaking to you through this text. So he wrote this text, and the retreat was restricted. It was restricted to people who had done the foundational practices, because it is the tradition, long-standing in Tibet, that it's important to prepare to receive Dzogchen teachings, these great completeness teachings. They're subtle, they're simple. They're so simple that if you haven't kind of plowed the inner ground space, they'll kind of roll right off your back, and you'll think, oh yeah, I know that, and not really give it the deep, deep attention that it requires. So he wrote this text on Dzogchen, as I imagine, and I'm happy, you won't care, but I'm very happy, and it delayed the book by a year, that we actually have the Tibetan text here so that Tibetans will be able to read it. I'm going to read you a few passages from the beginning of his text, and then also from the commentary. The commentary is what he gave at that retreat, and it's much more expansive, and also, in a sense, more intimate, and you could say secret. So the only people who were allowed to come to the retreat were people who had finished or were really on their way, supposedly, to finishing the foundational practices. So I didn't know if he would want it published, and at first it seemed like he didn't. But then he said, yeah, translate the book. And then the commentary is just so amazing and really brings the book to life. And I said, what about the commentary? He said, yes. And then I talked with Lama Tenzin, who helped me with my last questions on it. Should we make it a restricted book? Because they do that. Some books are restricted now, translations. He said no. So it's a wonderful gift, and it's a gift that will ripen as you practice. That's one thing I can say. So I'm going to read you the opening paragraph and then the first paragraph of his first chapter from the book itself. Actually, to honor him, I'm going to just read the title in Tibetan. Lama Shedam gi ningbo tamje chok chik de jube ningdam norbu doshel shejawa shukso. That's the text. We translated it as Strand of Jewels, my teacher's essential guidance on Dzogchen. He says, seeking refuge, I bow down to my glorious, excellent lamas and their unparalleled kindness. Please bless my mind stream. With this earnest prayer, I begin. For the supreme heirs of my own heart, his students, this aged practitioner has gathered the splendid, enlightened speech of his own superb teachers. Their words are like sacred, radiant relics of Buddha's sheer essence, enlightened dimension, relics of the Dharmakaya. The great completeness, or Dzogchen teachings, on base, path, and fruition are unsurpassed and swift, holding a great secret. These teachings provide supreme entry to the path. We begin here with a stage-by-stage discussion of how the base exists, how the path proceeds, and what their fruition is. A little later he says, the profound key instructions necessary for complete attainment of the enlightened state, our unsurpassed well-being, are laid out in stages. They are taught by way of three significant topics. First, the great completeness that is the base. Second, the great completeness that is the path. And third, the great completeness that is fruition. Base, path, and fruit. Crucial topics. In leading us through these one by one, I will succinctly explain the meaning of the view from the perspectives of making and liberating errors in the base, the intrinsic, genuine state. And I will explain in detail how you initially proceed with the practices of serene abiding and special seeing, shamatha and vipassana, in order to enter the self-risen and settled ease of the genuine state, the great completeness path. After explaining the fruitional great completeness, namely how the three genuine and stainless Buddha dimensions, once they become manifest, act to benefit beings, I describe Dzogchen through explanation, refutation, and synopsis. His text quotes many beautiful poems that were spoken by his teachers. And before going on to a few short quotes from the commentary, I want to read you part of this poem from his teacher Dzogchen Rinpoche. Dzogchen Rinpoche, there's a large black and white photograph outside to the left there that you've seen many times. That's Dzogchen Rinpoche, who was the head, as I said, of the Nyingma school. A great, great figure historically in the Buddhist tradition of Tibet. So this is from his poem, Dzogchen Rinpoche's poem. Pray intently to your root Lama, inseparable from Ogyen lotus born, Padmasambhava. In the end, that exalted heart-mind infuses your mind. Rest in evenness. As you rest, your empty, clear, and sheer awareness does not long remain. Your mind is racing. It's a helter-skelter arrow of maliciousness, just plain foul and vaulting about like a monkey. This is what your mind is actually like. These are what we call thoughts. If you go along with them, then, exactly because of such conceptualizing, you have no reflective remembering, and no thought, not one, of any limits on what you are doing. In the past, I too was propelled by erroneous conceptions, fading into blackness in the ocean of cyclic existence. That this plunging will continue is for sure. So better set a limit to erroneous thoughts, this dark meandering. Do you wonder what sheer awareness is like once this limit is set? It is an utterly vivid emptiness, a state of no doing, a spacious immensity and clarified bliss. Free from experiencing anything as defined by its particulars, there is nothing in all of cyclic existence and nirvana that it does not embrace. It's primordially inborn, never apart, transcending effort and objects of mind. Moving to the commentary, and he says, in Tibet, so you can see that Dzogchen is it's described in very simple words, and yet, what is he talking about? Experientially, right? We recognize that we don't fully know, or even if we have glimpses, we recognize that we don't live in that as thoroughly as we might. In Tibet, proper teaching of Dzogchen means that students prepare for it by completing their foundational practices and engaging in creation practices, followed by learning the completion stage practices involving the winds and channels. These are all part of our curriculum. Then we are ready for Dzogchen, the final view, the peak, including Dzogchen teachings of setting free and soaring forth. Now we have reversed this process, he tells us, novice retreatants. This is the teacher's fault, my fault. We are climbing this mountain from the top down. Once we're teaching from the very top like this, it may be difficult to go back down. I'm being straightforward and honest with you. Please don't take offense. When we speak about the training and reorientation that accords with sheer awareness, we mean that your conduct always accords with the view of Dzogchen, so that you are not governed by ordinary worldly concerns and considerations. Within this view, you are there for whatever arises. Whether we are speaking of the old or new schools in Tibet, they all have a single source, the word of Buddha. Everything they do is based on this. So whether one bears the name Nyingma or Kagyu and so on, the meaning, the view is really the same. Throughout this book, there is a thread of his non-sectarianism. You may know that in Tibet, that was an important thread, but there was also a lot of sectarianism. So he's really speaking out against this, and actually part of what he describes in unusual detail is how the four Buddhist traditions of Tibet actually all come to the same place in their different ways. Back to the foundational practices. The foundational practices are for cleansing our innumerable afflictions and defilements. Creation and completion practices train us in maintaining purity of vision and bringing suffering or happiness to the path. In Dzogchen, we speak of form, sound, and mind actually being deity, mantra, and sheer awareness. That's the prayer after meditation that we always say he's referring to. In Tibet, practitioners in Dzogchen lineages move from the bottom to the top of the mountain. We here today are in an unusual circumstance, teaching from the top of the mountain. How did this come about? That Dzogchen has become such a famous teaching rests on the shoulders of both teachers and students. Students take great interest in it since they want what is exalted and renowned, and they really press on their teachers to receive it. Teachers want to please their students, so they teach it. Sometimes students who have read something about Dzogchen with other teachers come and ask me about it. But I always tell them, please do the foundational practices before you come to talk with me. Sometimes I tell them to learn Tibetan too. They get upset, even angry, and leave. They leave and read some books, perhaps not even receiving teachings related with it, and such books become the basis of their understanding of Dzogchen. My feeling is that unless one is a proper vessel, one is unlikely to understand the meaning of this teaching. My concern for you doing the foundational practices is to help you become a vessel for them. That is why I do not teach Dzogchen to anyone who asks. Please do not be put off by this. It's not that I am miserly or want to hold on to it. It's not that I don't want to teach. I just don't feel it helps to teach Dzogchen to someone who has not done foundational practices and some purification. Why not? Because anyone still possessed of the coarser afflictions simply will not understand. Many people are displeased with me nowadays because I don't teach to casual comers. But it is not just some old-fashioned custom to cultivate the foundational practices and Tantra before doing Dzogchen. This is not an old custom, it's the custom. If you call it an old custom, that already means you're throwing it away. Which makes it all the more amazing that he agreed for this book to be published. You understand? The very end of his life, he opened his hand and he started teaching in some public situations, some very, very profound teachings. And this apparently is traditional. And you kind of, when you hear someone doing that, you think, oh, that means he's going to leave soon. Teachers somehow tend to do that. Practice requires perseverance. Once you are skilled in Dzogchen's view and have full experience of it, you can fulfill all the hopes of sentient beings. Dzogchen is the peak of the 9 vehicles, and through it you can complete all the grounds and the paths. It has a very special quality. Someone asked, we got to ask a lot of questions. Can we be of benefit before then? Certainly. Long before then, you can be a model for others by leaving aside worldly inclinations and helping to inspire those around you. Think carefully about this and see if it is so. Question: what about teaching children? Rinpoche says, please do this with great care. The well-being of the world depends on giving children good training on their learning well and behaving well. This training of children depends on the teacher. So if you are that teacher, please be very careful and do your work well. Because this is Rinpoche's only book on Dzogchen that he himself wrote, I really wanted it to be, an homage to him. And so it includes the long life prayers and prayer for swift rebirth that were written by Dudja Rinpoche and Dudja Rinpoche's son, Tinley Norba Rinpoche. And it also includes his own telling of his life story, which he did at Jeffrey Hopkins' request at University of Virginia, and Jeffrey kindly let me just take it and edit it. Jeffrey had translated it orally and included in this book. So, he had the culmination of his life, he's a great practitioner. But his early life was not so easy. So I'm just going to read you a paragraph or two from what he tells about his own story, which had a lot of challenges in it. I was born into a middle-class farming family, southern Tibet, south of Lhasa. Around age 11, I began thinking that I would like to study in a monastery. When I approached my parents about this, they disagreed. In my family, the children stayed home. They were not sent away for education. But one day, I took a leather pouch, loaded it up with 1 day's worth of tsampa, roasted barley, and ran away. I didn't have far to go because there was a monastery, Norbu Chirling Khamgompa, in Yade, on the other side of a pass from my house. I went there. Because I had run away from home, others at the monastery looked down on me and made me a servant of the other monks. This meant that I spent a lot of time carrying water. I spent my days getting water and my nights sweeping and cleaning the monks' quarters. There was an old monk there who taught me reading and writing in my spare time between chores. There isn't much to tell about this period in my life. I just spent it working. 3 months after my arrival at Norbu Chirling, my father, having figured out where I was, brought me a few pieces of clothing and some food. He was concerned, and he thought this was inappropriate. He said to me, "Come home with me, you must." But I was determined to stay. I told him I was learning reading and writing, and that it seemed I would have more opportunities to study at the monastery, and that I would stay another year or 2. My father was still uneasy, so before he left, he met with one of the monastery's leaders. He explained that I had never, at this young age, done much work, and that I really didn't know very much. My father was worried about my well-being and asked this monastic official to be as kind to me as he could. This monk was a particularly frightening person who often beat the young monks. He told my father that young monks, myself included, were like cats crying meow, meow. If you beat them, they would at least pay attention. Still, since my father had requested I be shown some loving care, the monk would do what he could. I remained in the monastery as a servant until I was 15. During this period, I learned to read and write fairly well. I also memorized the monastery's prayers and learned to chant and play ritual music. I used to hide a book inside my robe. When no one was looking, I would stop work, take out my book, and study. When someone came along who would likely scold me for this, I put the book away and worked. But as soon as they were out of sight, I would take out the book and study again. I want to read one story about his great teacher, and I'll close with this, Gompo, Lama Gompo. He was a great yogi, always staying in hermitages, moving from one sacred place to another, attended by some of the many monks and nuns who were his disciples. He never had a fixed residence. I asked for the teaching of the LAUNCHeon Nyingtik. He refused. When I begged and cried, he commented, "Nowadays, everybody wants sudden enlightenment. I'm the only one who's doing gradual practice, working extremely hard." Finally, he agreed to teach me, and every day he would do a little bit of the text with me. As we moved from place to place, he always emphasized the importance of a good foundation, starting with the 4 thoughts that help turn the mind away from the ordinary concerns of samsara. In this way, I became familiar with some of the central works of the LAUNCHeon Nyingtik. When it came to Dzogchen, Gompo Rinpoche did not rely on texts. He gave instructions that laid bare the teachings, and instructions that came from his own long experience. In time, he told me stories of his own studies, how he received Dzogchen from Lama Tsulten Rangdrol, including how he received teachings on Jigme Lingma's masterpiece, Yeshe Lama, from him. This is a centerpiece of what we hope all of you students who are following this track will do. Adzur Rinpoche has taught it several times. We also studied it with Khetsun Rinpoche. It's kind of the heart center here, although we haven't had a chance to encounter it for several years. Then he gave me instructions and transmission of Yeshe Lama. Lama Gompo Rinpoche wanted to go on a pilgrimage to Samye. Since his knees were in very bad shape from so much sitting, he asked me to help and accompany him. We traveled together, taking the old Tibetan-style boat, a leather coracle, down the Sangpo River to Samye. At Samye, Gompo Rinpoche offered all his possessions and announced he was going to Samye's cave of white light. The cave gets its name because this is where the Dakini Yeshe Tsogyal attained a rainbow body. Incredible things happened in this place, and I would run out of time if I told them all to you. Here, though, is a brief story from our time there. When we arrived at this place, we heard fantastic music and wondered how the 3 people staying in this hermitage could make such a grand sound. Those 3 resident hermits, in turn, thought the visiting Lama must be causing this amazing symphonic display. In fact, it was probably a sign that Gompo Rinpoche was going to die in this place. We arrived on the 24th of the 10th lunar month. On the 25th day, Gompo Rinpoche announced that he had some important teachings for us and that we should call his chief patron so that she could also hear them. Her name was Sangye Drolma, and she lived at Seringjong. She arrived at noon the next day. Gompo Rinpoche told her that this would be the last day she would be able to meet with him, so she should ask any and all of her questions on meditation now. Can you imagine? She had none, because she was so concerned that this was the last day of his life. Lama Gompo said, "If you don't have anything to ask, all of you leave. Close up this place. Nobody come in here for 7 days." When we left him in the cave, Lama Gompo, who is a large person, was wearing heavy clothes because of the cold. His main attendant became uneasy, and so after 6 days, he decided to look into the cave. He saw only clothing inside, no body. The attendant started to gather the clothing, but then the Lama appeared, yet much smaller than he was when we last saw him, with a tremendous brilliance of light and emitting rainbows. Gompo Rinpoche had explained before going into this final retreat that he would reduce the size of his body and turn it into a rainbow body, but that if this was not successful, we were to cremate his body. The attendant wanted to cremate what remained of his body, but 2 other lamas there wanted to bring the remains to their monastery. Everyone began arguing. Lama Gompo's students felt the proper thing to do was to obey his wishes and cremate his remains. So we did this, and many absolutely extraordinary things occurred. Rainbows and relics of different kinds appeared in the ashes. We divided the relics and sent half to the monastery of Dodrupchen. The remainder we divided to place in 2 or 3 stupas, or reliquaries. That's the kind of life he had, and the taste of the kind of teaching that he gave. It's a very wonderful moment to share it with you. And the only reason for his writing it, or our talking about it, or teaching here for that matter, is so that we can all, in our own way, in our own time, have the kinds of experiences of liberation and freedom and happiness that motivated him to write it. So his prayer and ours is that we all will actually taste this and accomplish this through our practice. So thank you. Happy Heart Essence Valentine's Day. I'll sign if you have, could take 2 minutes for quite a couple minutes. I know some people have to leave. If you have questions, or you may not have questions for a few years. Anybody? Then rest in silence, auspicious silence. Okay, I'll sit here and then thank you, Gary. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, team. Jerry, Mary Scott, everybody.
We'll shake it again. Sorry, I'm a very beginner. Do you have something spoken something here that would... This sounds too much for me.
It's like, it's not mine.
So we have a number of things, both on video and what? Or we're teaching that.
Yeah, I see you're teaching Thursday. I'll try to work this out.
Okay, because what we're doing now is kind of what have we done so far? Would you like to make some of it?
Yeah.
What have we done so far?
Well, I've been following spiritual paths and spiritual teachings. I would call myself a spiritualist more than anything else. But I've been meditating for 11 years. Reading, trying to get there. Real Buddhism that started sounding good. I wrote a book about...
Do you think it might be spiritual? Not that long? Okay.
11, I started.
Okay.
Today, not last week.
All right. Not last time.
I put it on my sign-up sheet, Steve Sellers, and I speak
You can write me a
I remember from my job outside of Houston.
Yeah, that was how to say.
Yeah. I couldn't see, I didn't have my glasses. Oh, that's richer than I am And also at the Rice University. I remember how we would sit.
Yeah.
Rice
Nice to meet you, man.
Thank you, Steve. Nice to meet you. Look forward to seeing you again.
All right.
No, I just thought Elizabeth put another text up, another class up, starting March.
If I just think about it, you know,
I'm giving you one when you want it.
my niece, M-A-R, so it takes me back.
And so the only way out yeah, the only way out is to
Yeah, exactly.
offer him a couple of espressos.
You can be specific. That's fine.
It's right there, it's on, maybe. Gary, if you bring me that. It's on Gary's. Hello. So Gary and I have been realizing we have to learn Tibetans.
Where are we trying to go?
That's Gary.
Everybody's
I must be crying for your attention.
This one?
Yeah, let me go.
I can actually turn off the light over there so you can see a little bit better. Oh, I can see you in the picture. The real big one?
I've not seen yet.
You'll have to scoot over, I think.
Oh, I don't see them. There.
Jerry, right there, is the bag lady. She's the woman.
No way to talk about Jerry.
Yeah. You notice when I say things like that, I'm across the room. Lots of distance.
Okay, so
I talked to Harvey already. I've seen someone for a while,
Hey, hey.
just, you know, the feeling, don't you? Yeah.
But just think about it.
I almost, just because it can, just because it can. I don't know. Yeah, there's more, but I know there's like people, so I'm so tickled. Tickled about this book, because you read this.
Okay, that's great. We talked about it.
It sounded familiar to me. Oh, you talked about it?
Yes.
Oh, I'm so.
Well, these new cameras are great. Oh, good. Thanks. All practice.
Friend of mine, he's trying to learn Spanish. So he's been watching
Tucson?
I mean, we don't share books.
Whoa.
We make totally different
Oh,
markings.
we have
make
uncovered
totally
a
different
problem
markings.
here.
No. You know? Yeah, because if it's your study, yeah.
So this is the excuse for the beatings they filled with?
Oh, stop.
Well, I mean, he was just telling me about
So
that.
is Marlies in that picture?
I don't know. I see Miss Terry though.
Where's Terry?
There in the middle with the red hair.
Oh,
I saw Sharon. You can't miss Sharon. Yeah. The red hair, that's what you said. The red hair.
But I don't see Marlies.
you should do it at least once. I mean, how are you?
he is next. You're next after him. I just stand around.
I was a better student at it than last, but I haven't seen my husband in 3 months, so I'm gonna go back. It's Valentine's.
Oh, you're just opening up one can of worms after another. Really, thinking about this in front of me.
I was a good student. That's why I'm being wildly so see my honey. He's gonna be gone all week.
He must have been awfully busy because I sent him
Where is
an email about helping with the cameras for the animals. And it was kind of like, hey, you're going to get out of my office for the next 2 weeks. I can't. You know.
No, and they've got so much going on.
Where is he going?
He's a logger, right? So
For a startup.
it's just a wave of evil coming through. That, oh, never mind.
That might be one way to say it.
There you go.
And he's just doing so well. He's a beneficial president.
A server.
He's so well. Thank you so much. Okay, I'll see you soon. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, good to see you.
All right, I am gonna take off. All right. I will. I'll tell him you miss him.
You know, we gotta have these bottom dwellers around, you know, to keep things in.
See, you guys speak the same language. Exactly. It's good for both of you, right?
You know, it's like having your own little club, you know.
Exactly.
The only problem is that it's kind of like being in the lepers club. It's not anybody really wants to associate with that club.
I do.
What kind of blog is going on here?
Energy.
God, I'm surprised. Well, lots of businesses going under, restructuring.
Oh, well, and they're doing some acquisitions, and they've got all kinds of stuff going on.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for my turn.
Like the actual glue you have for the mixture. So when you're making the cement, all that stuff checks out.
Well, I'll be here. And if I don't get my book signed today, I'll see Ann again.
Yeah, we
I'll be
I'm
back.
not like a Robertist, I just know that they're admitting a lot, also, so they're also, to get a large portion of their energy supply. For carbon credits.
Pat Bill on that for us, so that's what we're doing for them. That's from Gary.
The financing side.
And not as hard as you always do.
Let's do it again.
Like you would in the oil field, you have an operator.
He's one of the best.
We're the
really is. Yeah, he really is.
No, he is.
I have to remember to.
So you have to go on site.
I don't know, you can remember that when I'm doing my assignment.
Wait, wait, hear us again.
Yeah, we have.
Don't steal that slide.
Karen?
You know what it could be doing.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
I'll just tell them you said thank you. You're like, thank you.
When I say pass
Do you want to go ahead and talk about
it.
that?
Yes, sir.